Thank you, Mr. Parker, for your testimony. Just a couple of questions, if I could. Um, I For close to 30 years, I have spoken out. I've been in Congress 40 years, but very strongly on my opposition to what the IRA and the UDF and others were doing in Northern Ireland. I am ultimately opposed to the use of terrorism. But there was a number of cases, both of Protestants and Catholics, whose causes I took up. I chaired 17 congressional hearings on police reform, human rights in Northern Ireland. I went to Belfast several times, like other members of Congress. But I was especially working in recent years, and as part of all of this, on the case of Patrick Finucane. I've got to know the Finucane family extremely well. Geraldine actually testified at 5 of my hearings. One of them was with Judge Peter Corey, who you will recall, the Canadian Supreme Court Justice, who was very, very a linchpin in the Westmont Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement. And, part of what he authored or helped negotiate was that some of these important legacy cases would be fully and completely in a totally transparent way investigated, and hopefully the culprits, the killers, would be found. In 2005, I had Judge Corey testify a second time, this time by way of a letter and information he sent. And we were all particularly concerned about the anti-terrorism legislation and the Public Inquiries Act or bill. And it conveyed to the bureaucrats who would be compelled to say who did what, when, and how did they do it. And as Geraldine Finucane said, it's not just the people that pulled the trigger, but who pulled the strings, was her quote at one of our hearings, a very, very profound statement. But they gave veto power to the very people who would be in the position to say that information doesn't get made public. And it just completely shattered the credibility of the government. For the record, I'll put, Mr. Chairman, without objection, Peter Corey's statement, which he made, which couldn't have been clearer. He pretty much called it a joke that when you have a terrorism mindset, and then you say we're not going to give the information, but we're going to be completely transparent. It's a very cruel joke. And so I loved what Geraldine had said in one of my hearings. She said, "I will fight to resist the proposed law because I want to know the truth about the murder of my husband. I refuse to allow the British government to take away that truth as easily as it took away Pat's life." And you all recall, how that happened. They were at the table. She was wounded as well. And in came masked men who just slaughtered him and others. And then another woman that we had at a hearing, Rosemary Nelson, I met her in Belfast, and she said, the RUC is telling me they're going to kill me. They're saying, we're going to kill you. This is the police. And she could never see who it was because the badge was covered. And she was an attorney, a human rights attorney, and a fine one at that. So I had her at a hearing, and they murdered her too. She blew up, as you know, and they incinerated her car. Lisa Massimino, who I mentioned earlier, was at some of our hearings from Washington. She was the Washington Director of Human Rights First, and other human rights organizations persistently came to these hearings. I got resolutions passed on the House floor. I even got a bill passed that said that we will not train anybody at Quantico who's with the RUC unless they're fully vetted for any human rights violations, either way, against the Catholics or against the Protestants, but it was predominantly against the Catholics, as we all know. I met with Ronnie Flanagan on occasions in Belfast, was totally unimpressed as head of the RUC. And of course, I had Chris Patton come and testify at a hearing, and he spoke about the reforms, and I think the reforms were outstanding. But still, this case of Patrick Finucane persists, and it's just, the truth needs to come out, and we're not going to give up ever. There's no statute of limitations on murder and complicity in murder. We know that from our legacy civil rights cases here in the United States. So I'd like to ask you, and I've been to Long Kesh. I remember when I was at Long Kesh, they said, oh, look, we have a we've installed cameras so that nobody can be beaten. And then I was told by someone at the prison, yeah, they turn the cameras off when they're beating people. So, after a while, you begin to see a pattern of purportedly trying to mitigate terrorism, but committing atrocious acts of human rights abuse yourself. So your thought on the anti-terror bill and the Inquiries Act, will we ever get a true and thorough and honest accounting of who ordered it, how high it went up in the chain of command? Cameron apologized, which was they all welcomed. And then he and both Labor and conservative governments then put a tourniquet on releasing any other information that would really finally give the full picture of what happened and hold people to account. So your thoughts on
that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I can't speak for the British government, and I'm not here in a capacity that would, obviously I'm.
No, I'm not asking that. I'm asking as a human rights guy,
Well, I would echo the comments made by the special rapporteur, which you can't move forward until you've had a clear accounting for the past. And I firmly believe that. I spent, 5 years of my life as a war crimes investigator dedicated to that proposition, that bringing facts to light would actually allow people to move forward and build a stronger foundation for coexistence in the future. Personally, I do believe that. But my own experience with Northern Ireland is I was blown up by an IRA bomb on my 21st, well, not my 21st, a friend's 21st birthday party in central London, which is why I joined the security service and was quite strongly motivated. And I remember attending the Northern Ireland background briefing course that we had in MI5. It's a week long. They sort of bring you up to speed on Irish history, which isn't particularly well taught in British schools. And I always remember leaving the course on a Friday afternoon and thinking, my God, no wonder they hate us, because the history of the UK and in Ireland is bad. And the reason we have at least the iteration of violence with the Troubles is because of the very aggressive response to the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association in the late 1960s. I mean, there was an effort to raise Catholic issues or nationalist issues or Republican issues, however you want to characterize it, by that community within a non-violent framework, absolutely explicitly modeled on the approach adopted by Martin Luther King. And it was met with violence. And that's what essentially accelerated the spiral into the Troubles. So, I think it is incredibly important to get a clear accounting of what's been done on all sides. Because, there are lots of different issues for all of the communities in Northern Ireland and indeed on the British mainland, where people still don't have answers to what happened to their loved ones. And nobody can move on until they have that. And it doesn't matter which society on earth you come from, that's the reality.
Well, and there is no doubt, Mr. Parker, that I had Protestant witnesses, I had Catholic witnesses at my hearings, believing that, again, violence is no means to an end, ever. And certainly, but when the government in charge, the police ombudsman, I thought it did a tremendous job in Lula Alone, who's now a member of the House of Lords, at great risk to herself. She had death threats that were just about every other day, if not every day. So there were a lot of good people, but why this? I don't understand it with Pat Finucane. Is it because it went so high? And again, when Joe Doherty was about to be, there was a big push in the United States to send him back. I wasn't for that. He killed at least two British soldiers, and I was for sending him back so he could continue his jail term. And that caused some stir here by people who thought he was a political prisoner. No, he had committed an act of terror. But with Pat Finucane and with Rosemary Nelson and Pat, we still don't have this accounting. And so I would ask you if you could, to raise your voice on behalf of the Finucanes, because the sons have testified at hearings. Certainly Geraldine at 5 of them. She's a very compelling person. And the European Parliament, the UN, the United States Congress, both House and Senate, the presidents, we've all asked for that full accounting. And again, what they do, and I'm just, it just underscores that if information does not flow, and all of a sudden, this Public Inquiries Act or bill just says you've got veto power, you being the bureaucracy, about giving this information out. Again, Judge Corey was incredulous that they would not be forthcoming after giving solemn promises for the Good Friday Agreement. So if any way you could help on that, and I take the view, those soldiers like yourself who suffered, it shouldn't be the case ever. So that's which is why with Doherty, he did kill some British soldiers. So if you could, maybe speak a little bit further on it, and then I'll yield back. Because Pat Finucane needs, there needs to be an accountability here, and it's bipartisan. Every one of my resolutions were co-sponsored. Richie Neal from Massachusetts was always right there with me, offering those resolutions, and Peter King when he was a member of Congress years ago. So please, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should also mention that I'm an American these days, so I don't know how much weight my voice would carry, but I am familiar with the case, and I completely agree with you that a full accounting of what happened is essential both for the family, but also for society to move on. But if I may, there's one thing that you raised that I think is a really important point worth pulling out a little bit further, which is this issue of if you have no confidence in the way that another state is going to behave when you are asked for your cooperation, there is going to be reluctance to cooperate. And you touched on it there with extradition requests, which, as I'm sure you're familiar, was quite a big issue between the UK and the US in the 1980s, and also obviously between the Republic of Ireland and the UK. And one of the things that helped the UK get to a point where it got the sort of cooperation that it needed from the US and the Republic of Ireland was by adhering to a higher standard and making sure that it adhered to the European Convention on Human Rights, and raised the confidence level that both on the part of the United States and the Republic of Ireland, that people who were brought back to face justice in the UK would receive a fair trial. And I think we see that again and again in international cooperation. States are far more willing and far more comfortable cooperating with a state that adheres to international human rights standards than they are, of course, cooperating with a state that doesn't. And I think that's a really important point.